The knock came at sunset, 3 deliberate raps that echoed through the empty Riker ranch like gunshots. Jonah wiped flour from his calloused hands, wondering who'd venture this far into Wyoming territory at dusk. He opened the door to find a woman with tired eyes and steady shoulders, and behind her, partially hidden in twilight shadows, a small girl clutching a worn rag doll. "I was told you need a cook," the woman said simply, voice carrying the weight of desperation wrapped in dignity. Jonah's breath caught not from her words, but from the sight of the child who reminded him painfully of another little girl, buried 3 summers past beneath Montana's sky. Clarabelle stood straighter despite her exhaustion, one protective hand resting on her daughter Daisy's shoulder. This weathered cowboy, studying them with haunted blue eyes, might be their last hope or their next disappointment. What neither stranger realized was that fate had delivered exactly what both needed most, a chance to rebuild what grief had torn apart. But would the ghosts of their pasts allow such healing? Or would darker forces tear this fragile new beginning to pieces? Wyoming territory stretched endless beneath summer sky in 1879, a land where promises died as quickly as they were born. The Riker Ranch squatted like a lone sentinel against the vastness, modest buildings weathered silver gray, corrals holding a handful of cattle, and gardens that had once bloomed with a woman's touch now surrendering to prairie grass. Towns were distant memories, connected by rutted trails where travelers prayed their supplies would outlast the journey. Law existed in the form of circuit judges and armed men willing to enforce their own justice. Here, your past mattered less than your present ability to survive, and second chances came to those brave enough to seize them. Jonah Riker had once been a different man, a father who read bedtime stories, a husband who woke to gentle kisses, a rancher whose land promised abundance. That man died 3 summers ago when fever took his wife Belle and their 5-year-old daughter Emma within a week of each other. What remained was a hollow shell who spoke to horses better than humans, who burned every meal he attempted, who slept in the barn because the house still smelled like Belle's rose water. Grief had carved him hollow as a winter tree, yet beneath the emptiness burned an ember of the man he'd been protective, gentle with small things, capable of love that could move mountains. Before the war, Jonah had been building something meaningful, expanding the ranch, planning additions to the house for the children he and Belle dreamed of raising. Combat in Virginia had taught him that life was fragile, but losing his family had taught him it was also precious beyond measure. He knew the taste of loneliness, the sound of his own voice echoing in empty rooms, the particular silence that follows when the people you love simply stop breathing. Clarabelle Hayes carried different scars, but equal weight, born in Montana's rugged territory. She'd left home at 16, not from adventure, but from necessity. Too many graves, too many ghosts. Her father and brothers had marched off to fight for the Union and never returned. Her mother had simply stopped eating, stopped speaking, stopped living, until death claimed her too. Clarabelle learned survival meant adaptation, cooking for trail crews, cleaning for settlers, always moving before questions about her past could surface. Daisy's father had been a brief encounter with a charming man who vanished when reality arrived in the form of an expected child. For 3 years, Clarabelle had protected Daisy through sheer determination, teaching her daughter that home wasn't a place but a feeling you carried inside. She could stretch $1 until it screamed, cook a feast from scraps, and read weather patterns like scripture. Yet beneath her practical exterior lived a woman who dreamed of stability, of watching Daisy grow up somewhere safe, of belonging somewhere longer than a season. The central conflict brewing on the horizon wore the face of Warren Keyes, a man who claimed blood rights to Daisy through her absent father. Armed with forged documents and genuine malice, for Jonah, protecting this unexpected family meant confronting his greatest fear, caring enough about someone to risk losing them again. For Clarabelle, trusting the kindness in Jonah's eyes meant gambling everything: her daughter's safety, their precarious security, her carefully guarded heart, on the hope that not all men disappeared when life demanded sacrifice. The stakes couldn't be higher if they failed to stand together. Daisy would be lost to a man who saw her as property rather than a person. If they succeeded, 3 broken souls might discover that families aren't born, they're chosen, fought for, and built one careful day at a time. But storms were already gathering on the distant horizon, and sometimes the greatest dangers came not from strangers, but from the lies we tell ourselves about what we deserve. Inside the modest ranch house that smelled of dust, leather, and the faint ghost of roses from Belle's long-dead garden, Clarabelle explained her qualifications with quiet dignity. I can cook for ranch hands, clean, help with whatever needs doing. Daisy won't be trouble, she's quiet, helpful. Her voice carried the careful neutrality of someone accustomed to selling herself to strangers. Jonah studied the small girl who reminded him so painfully of Emma, same dark curls, same serious eyes that seemed too old for her face. When Daisy instinctively moved closer to her mother, Jonah's heart clenched with recognition of protective love. I cooked for travelers on the Santa Fe Trail, Clarabelle continued, meeting his gaze steadily. Fed 40 men at a time with whatever provisions we had. I understand hard work, long hours, feeding people who earn their bread with sweat. Jonah nodded slowly, seeing beyond her words to the desperation she was trying to hide. These weren't travelers passing through, they were refugees seeking sanctuary. And something in their exhausted dignity demanded his protection. Make yourselves comfortable, he said finally, gesturing toward the hearth where Belle's chair still sat empty. There's fresh water in the pitcher, blankets in the chest. Daisy, are you hungry? The little girl nodded solemnly, and Jonah felt a strange warmth unfurl in his chest, the first he'd experienced in 3 years of winter. That evening, Clarabelle prepared southern meat pie using ingredients she found in Jonah's poorly stocked kitchen, her movements efficient and sure. The aroma filled the cabin like a prayer answered, rich and savory, in a way that reminded Jonah of meals shared rather than merely consumed. He watched her work from the corner of his eye, noting how she instinctively knew where things belonged, how she moved through his space as if she understood the geography of loneliness. After the meal, the best Jonah had tasted since Belle's death, he surprised Clarabelle by washing his own dish without being asked. I'm accustomed to cleaning up after myself, he explained quietly. 3 years makes habits. Daisy, who had helped by setting out forks with careful precision, curled up in Belle's chair by the fireplace, and fell asleep to the sound of crackling logs. Jonah retrieved a woolen blanket, approaching the sleeping child with the reverent care of someone who had once performed this ritual nightly. As he gently draped the fabric over Daisy's small form, Clarabelle watched with wonder this moment of tenderness from a man who could have turned them away. The morning brought new discoveries. Jonah brushed his aging mare Belle, while Clarabelle offered him lemon water she'd prepared from their dwindling supplies. "Belle was my wife's name, too," he said, running gentle hands along the horse's neck. "Had her since before the war. She stopped eating when, after Belle died, took months to coax her back to health." The parallel wasn't lost on either of them. Grief had nearly claimed them all. "I was born in Montana," Clarabelle shared, settling beside him on the fence rail. "Left home at 16. Too many ghosts." Her simple words carried volumes of understanding. "Father and brothers went to war. Never came back. Mother just stopped living after that. Sometimes carrying the living is harder than burying the dead." Jonah studied her profile, noting how she held her shoulders despite the weight she carried. "You carry it well," he said softly. "The weight?" She met his eyes then, seeing recognition in their depths. "So do you," she replied, and something shifted between them, a bridge built from shared understanding of loss. But even as trust began to sprout like green shoots after winter, shadows were gathering that would test every fragile bond they were building. As days settled into routine, the ranch house gradually came alive. Clarabelle's morning coffee replaced Jonah's bitter attempts at brewing. Her humming filled rooms that had known only silence. Daisy explored the property with careful wonder, collecting smooth stones and wild flowers, her laughter echoing in spaces that had forgotten the sound of joy. Jonah found himself lingering at meals, reluctant to return to solitary work when conversation offered such unexpected comfort. The first real test came with a summer storm that arrived like divine fury. Clarabelle noticed the loose board on the roof during the afternoon calm that preceded nature's violence. "That'll let in water," she said, already calculating the damage if left unrepaired. Jonah joined her with hammer and nails, working against gathering clouds that promised destruction. Halfway through the repair, wind gusted with unexpected force, sending Clarabelle sliding toward the roof's edge. Jonah lunged forward, strong arms catching her just as panic flashed in her eyes for a heartbeat. They stayed frozen, her hands gripping his shoulders, his face inches from hers, both breathing hard from fear and something deeper. "I've got you," he said quietly, and the words carried more weight than mere reassurance. Daisy's voice calling from below broke the spell, but the promise lingered between them like warmth from banked coals. The storm that night tested more than their roof repairs. Rain hammered the house like artillery, while wind screamed through the valleys, rattling windows and setting the horses on edge. Daisy woke crying from nightmares, and Clarabelle held her close while Jonah checked that their hasty repairs would hold. In the morning, they discovered a hidden drawer in Belle's writing desk had warped open, revealing bundles of letters tied with faded ribbon. "She wrote me letters," Jonah explained when Clarabelle found him reading by lamplight that evening. "Even when she was dying, she kept writing. Look," he handed her a page covered in Belle's careful script. "Don't let grief become your whole world. Jonah, Emma and I want you to live, not just survive. If love finds you again, don't turn it away out of loyalty to ghosts." Clarabelle's throat tightened, reading words from a dead woman who understood love's true nature. "She was wise," she said softly, "and she loved you enough to want your happiness." That night, for the first time since Belle's death, Jonah invited someone to sit in the empty chair by the fire. "I need help building something new," he admitted. "I can't do it alone anymore." But happiness, they discovered, attracted its own predators. Warren Keyes arrived on a dust-covered horse 3 weeks later. Armed with forged documents claiming paternal rights to Daisy, "The girl belongs with family," he declared, his smile sharp as broken glass. "I've got papers saying so." Clarabelle's face went white as death. She knew Warren's reputation. His history of violence disguised as respectability. "No," Jonah said simply, stepping between Warren and his unexpected family. The single word carried finality. "You've got no rights here." Warren's genial mask slipped, revealing the predator beneath. "I'll be back with a warrant," he threatened. "Girl's coming with me one way or another." After he left, Clarabelle began packing with shaking hands, ready to run again rather than risk Daisy's safety. But Jonah had learned something in 3 years of loneliness. Sometimes standing still required more courage than running. He rode to town that same day, seeking lawyer Joseph Elliott with bundles of Clarabelle's carefully saved letters, receipts, and documentation of her good character. "This woman's been caring for that child alone for 3 years," he told Elliott. "She's got more right to guardianship than some stranger with questionable papers. Warren Keyes has a reputation," Elliott warned. "He's used forged documents before, taken children from desperate mothers. But if we file for formal custody on your behalf, establishing you as legal guardian with Miss Hayes as the child's primary caregiver, we can challenge his claims." Hope flickered like candle flame in wind, fragile but persistent. When Jonah returned with legal documents establishing protection, he found Clarabelle still packing, tears streaming down her face. "You don't have to leave," he said, showing her the papers. "Elliott says these will hold in any territorial court. Warren can't touch Daisy now." The breakdown that followed years of carrying everything alone was both devastating and healing. Clarabelle sobbed against Jonah's chest while he held her, finally understanding that strength sometimes meant accepting help. The final confrontation came when Warren returned with forged warrants and hired muscle, expecting easy victory. Instead, he found half the town gathered at the Riker Ranch townspeople Clarabelle had fed during their travels, families she'd helped in countless small ways, even Sheriff Thompson, who'd investigated Warren's previous schemes. "This woman's got more character in her little finger than you've got in your whole body," declared Mrs. Henley from the general store. "And that little girl's home is here?" Faced with unified opposition and the sheriff's knowing stare, Warren retreated, his threats hollow as autumn leaves. The townspeople stayed for an impromptu celebration, hanging lanterns that turned the ranch into a beacon of belonging as Daisy helped serve apple cider and fresh biscuits. She whispered to her diary that night, "Home isn't built from wood and nails. It's built from people who refuse to give up on each other." Yet even as victory settled around them like warm quilts, deeper questions remained unanswered. The legal victory over Warren Keyes should have brought peace, but instead it revealed how precarious their situation truly remained. 3 families didn't form overnight, and the weight of shared responsibility pressed against wounds still tender from past losses. Jonah lay awake nights wondering if his protection was enough, if his growing feelings for Clarabelle were betraying Belle's memory or honoring her final wishes. Clarabelle struggled with accepting help after years of fierce independence, terrified that leaning on someone else would make her weak again. The crisis that nearly shattered them came from an unexpected source, Daisy herself. The child who had been so quiet, so careful, suddenly began acting out, refusing meals, crying without apparent reason, clinging to Clarabelle while simultaneously pushing away from Jonah. The behavior escalated until one morning Clarabelle found Daisy trying to pack her small belongings in the pre-dawn darkness. "We have to leave," Daisy whispered urgently, "before he changes his mind, before he decides he doesn't want us anymore. They always change their minds, Mama." The words hit Clarabelle like physical blows, her own fears given voice by her 5-year-old daughter, who had learned too young that safety was temporary, that men's kindness came with invisible prices. "Sweet baby, he's not going to send us away," Clarabelle soothed, but doubt crept into her voice. What did she really know about Jonah beyond 3 weeks of shared meals and gentle gestures? What if Daisy's instincts were better than her own desperate hope for stability? The confrontation came that evening when Jonah found them both sitting on the porch with their bags packed. "Going somewhere?" he asked quietly, and Clarabelle heard the hurt he was trying to hide beneath casual words. "Daisy thinks we should move on," she said, unable to meet his eyes. "Maybe she's right. We've imposed long enough." "Imposed?" Jonah's voice cracked slightly. "Is that what you think this is?" For the first time since they'd arrived, anger flashed in his eyes, not at them, but at the circumstances that had taught them to expect abandonment. "I asked you to help me build something new. That means staying. That means believing this is real." Daisy stood between them, small face fierce with protective instinct. "You're going to leave us just like everyone else leaves," she accused Jonah. "That's what grown-ups do. They promise things, and then they disappear." Her words hung in the evening air like an indictment of every adult who had failed her, including the father she'd never known. Jonah knelt to her level, his weathered hands gentle, but his voice steel strong. "I lost my little girl 3 years ago," he said simply. "Do you know what that taught me? That when someone special comes into your life, you don't let them go, not ever, not for any reason." He looked from Daisy to Clarabelle. "I'm not going anywhere. The question is whether you're brave enough to stay." But even as he spoke, telegrams were arriving in town that would test that promise. Warren Keyes hadn't given up. He'd gone to the territorial capital, filing formal complaints against Jonah and Clarabelle, claiming improper guardianship, moral irregularities, and demanding investigation by federal authorities. The weight of government bureaucracy, with its power to separate families on technicalities, threatened to crush their fragile bonds. Sheriff Thompson arrived the next morning with the telegram, his face grave. "Warren's made this official," he explained. "Territorial judge is sending an investigator." They'll want to examine the living situation, interview Daisy separately, ensure proper moral standards are being maintained. The implication was clear: an unmarried woman living with a widowed man, caring for a child not related to either of them, would face scrutiny that could destroy everything they'd built. "How long?" Jonah asked. "2 weeks, maybe 3," Thompson replied. "Investigators coming from Denver." The silence that followed was deafening. 3 weeks to prove that love could overcome legal technicalities, that family was more than blood relations, that their home was real despite not fitting conventional patterns. That night, with Daisy finally asleep, Clarabelle and Jonah sat by the dying fire facing an impossible choice. They could marry immediately, providing legal protection but risking a union built on necessity rather than love. They could maintain their current arrangement and fight the investigation, gambling everything on the hope that truth would prevail over prejudice. Or Clarabelle could leave with Daisy, protecting them both from the scandal but destroying the home they'd all begun to believe in. "What would Belle want?" Clarabelle asked quietly. Jonah stared into the glowing coals, seeing his wife's face in the shifting light. "She'd want us to fight," he said finally. "She'd want us to prove that love builds families, not law books." The decision made, they began preparing for the battle that would determine whether their fragile new beginning could survive the harsh judgment of a world that rarely understood the true meaning of home. The territorial investigator arrived on a Tuesday morning that dawned crisp with autumn promise. Augustus Pemberton stepped from the stagecoach like a man accustomed to finding fault-sharp eyes, pressed suit, and a briefcase filled with forms designed to measure morality in checkboxes. Clarabelle had spent days cleaning what was already spotless, while Jonah practiced explaining their arrangement in ways that wouldn't sound desperate or improper. "Miss Hayes," Pemberton began, settling in the parlor with official gravity, "I understand you've been residing here unmarried with Mr. Riker for nearly 2 months. What assurances can you provide regarding the propriety of this arrangement?" His pen hovered over papers like a weapon waiting to strike. Clarabelle straightened her spine, channeling every lesson learned from years of survival. "Mr. Riker provided employment and safe lodging when my daughter and I had nowhere else to turn. He's been a perfect gentleman, sleeping in the barn to preserve propriety while ensuring we had shelter. Any impropriety exists only in minds that can't imagine kindness without ulterior motive." When Pemberton interviewed Daisy separately, the child's words carried more weight than any adult testimony. "Mr. Jonah reads me stories about horses," she said solemnly. "He makes sure I say prayers for my daddy I never met and for his little girl who's in heaven. He doesn't yell or hit or make mama cry. He fixes things that are broken and makes them better." From the mouths of babes came truth that cut through legal complexity. Pemberton spent 3 days examining their life-household arrangements, financial records, character references. He interviewed townspeople, reviewed Jonah's military service records, even checked the quality of their vegetable garden as evidence of domestic stability. Throughout it all, Warren Keyes lurked in town, buying drinks for anyone willing to whisper doubts about the unusual family arrangement. The breaking point came when Pemberton discovered Belle's letters to Jonah, still tied with faded ribbon in the writing desk. "These demonstrate your late wife's encouragement of new attachments," he noted clinically. Yet you maintain no romantic involvement with Miss Hayes. Isn't this arrangement emotionally confusing for all parties involved? Jonah's patience finally snapped. You want to know what's confusing? He said, standing to his full height. It's a world where kindness is suspect, where helping someone in need requires government permission, where a child's happiness matters less than checking boxes on your forms. My wife wanted me to live, not just survive. This woman and her daughter brought life back to a house that was dying. If that confuses you, maybe you're asking the wrong questions. Clarabelle watched this man she'd grown to love defend their imperfect family with fierce passion, and felt her last walls crumble that evening as Pemberton prepared his final report. She found Jonah on the porch staring at autumn stars. I've been thinking about what you said, she began softly, about building something new. I want to build it with you officially, legally, completely, not because we have to, but because we choose to. Jonah turned to face her, seeing certainty where doubt had lived. Are you proposing to me, Clarabelle Hayes? The smile that spread across his weathered face could have lit the entire valley. Because if you are, the answer is yes. It's been yes since you knocked on my door that first night. They married 2 days later, in a ceremony hastily arranged but deeply meaningful. Judge Morrison rode out from town, declaring their union legal in the eyes of God and territory alike. Daisy served as witness, her small hand resting in Jonah's as they exchanged vows that transformed legal necessity into chosen love. The townspeople gathered again, bringing flowers and food, celebrating not just a wedding, but the triumph of family over bureaucracy. Pemberton's final report, filed that afternoon, recommended approval of the custody arrangement. The child is well cared for in a stable household, he wrote. Recent marriage provides additional legal protection. No evidence of impropriety or neglect found. Warren Keyes's claims appear motivated by financial gain rather than genuine concern for child welfare. Warren, faced with official rejection and community opposition, finally slithered away to prey on easier targets. Sheriff Thompson made sure he understood that any future harassment would be met with criminal charges. Justice, sometimes delayed, had finally arrived wearing the badge of truth. As winter settled over the ranch, the new family found their rhythm. Clarabelle's name joined Jonah's on the deed, making her a full partner in the land they were building together. Daisy thrived with the security of two parents who had chosen her as deliberately as they'd chosen each other. The house, filled with sounds of belonging laughter echoing from the kitchen, stories shared by the fire, plans for spring planting discussed over coffee that actually tasted good. One evening in December, as snow painted the world clean, Daisy sat at Belle's writing desk, now simply called the desk, working on a letter to her diary. Dear Diary, she wrote in careful letters, today, Mama and Jonah talked about adding rooms to the house for all the children they want to have. They asked if I wanted a brother or sister, and I said both. I think Belle would be happy that her house has love in it again. A home isn't built from wood and nails, it's built from people who refuse to give up on each other. We're those kind of people now. The transformation of the Riker Ranch became legend throughout Wyoming territory, but its true impact measured itself in smaller, more intimate changes, Jonah learned to trust his capacity for love without betraying his past. Clarabelle discovered that strength could coexist with dependence. Daisy understood that families could be chosen, built, and trusted to endure. By spring, their story had spread through the network of travelers, settlers, and drifters who carried news across vast distances. Other women fleeing desperate situations began arriving at ranch doors throughout the territory. Emboldened by proof that honest work and genuine character could overcome legal obstacles, the precedent of the Riker custody case influenced territorial policy, making it easier for unmarried women to maintain guardianship of children while providing protections against fraudulent claims. The ranch itself flourished under their combined efforts. Clarabelle's vegetable garden produced surplus crops they sold in town. Jonah's herd grew with careful breeding and expansion. They hired seasonal help during busy periods, always offering fair wages and decent treatment, a reputation that attracted the best workers and ensured loyalty that money alone couldn't buy. More importantly, their home became a way station for travelers who needed more than supplies. They needed hope. Families fleeing poverty, women escaping violence, children separated from their parents all found temporary sanctuary at the Riker Ranch. The guest room Belle had dreamed of for their own children instead sheltered dozens of desperate souls who left stronger than they'd arrived. Daisy grew into a confident young woman who spoke multiple languages learned from their diverse guests, could cook for 20 people without breaking a sweat, and rode horses with the skill of someone born to the saddle. But her greatest gift was the certainty that love was strong enough to create families from strangers, homes from houses, and hope from heartbreak. Jonah's nightmares about losing people he loved gradually faded, replaced by dreams of the future they were building together. Belle's letters, reread during difficult moments, confirmed that loving again didn't diminish previous love, but multiplied it, that the heart's capacity was infinite when properly tended. Clarabelle discovered that independence didn't require isolation, that accepting help wasn't weakness, but wisdom. She became known throughout the territory as someone who could solve problems others considered impossible, who could stretch resources beyond their natural limits, who could create abundance from scarcity through sheer determination and careful planning. Their love story became proof that fairy tales could exist in harsh realities if people were brave enough to write their own endings. They demonstrated that family was a verb, not a noun, something you did daily rather than something you simply were. Years later, when grandchildren climbed on Jonah's lap demanding stories, he would tell them about a knock at the door that changed everything, about a woman who brought life back to a dying house, about a little girl who taught adults what home really meant. And the children would understand that the greatest adventures weren't found in distant lands, but in the courage to open your door when destiny came knocking.